Thank you all for being here. I heard about 5 people clap, so if you didn't know me earlier, you're gonna know me later. Okay, so why this conversation? Why am I here? I'm really blessed to be in this space with a lot of peers, something that I've been saying this weekend of how I want to enter this space for myself is to be a peer to you all, to listen and learn from you all. So my work is always as a journalist and someone who is constantly working to learn and understand more. As a journalist and a Gemini, I am very passionate about language and words. And so the person that I'm going to bring on, you know him for so many things, but I also know him as a philosopher and someone who has taught me so much about language and the meaning of language. So I feel like he needs no introduction because if you're here, you know why you're here. But I am so pleased and so honored to be bringing on Dr. Carl Hart. So I was just sharing with the audience that as a journalist, I am very passionate about words. And just to take you all on a journey, since we are on a drug journey, if you will, a psychedelic journey, whatever you want to call it, we're all here together. Let's go back to my college days at Berkeley. I was very inspired in this philosophy class. You know, when you first enter, you have to take like your prereqs. And in this philosophy class, I was introduced to a philosopher called George Berkeley. Anyone know who George Berkeley is? Just raise your hand. Okay, so George Berkeley was radical in his time. Even to this day, some people see him as a radical, and his opinions and perspectives still are a topic of debate. The things that he talked about, and I just remember my philosopher would say, like, an apple's not really an apple, a tree's not really a tree, the sky isn't really blue. All of these things are simply our perceptions of how we perceive this reality. They're simply sensations, and we put meaning to them. And many people know you as a neuroscientist, Dr. Hart, but as I was mentioning, I also see you as a philosopher. And similar to Berkeley, you are challenging us on our perceptions, particularly our perceptions around drugs. Something that you've said before is your work just isn't about drugs, it's about justice, truth, and liberation. What are some things that we need to shift in order to get free?
Thank you, Monica. Thank you for thinking of me as a philosopher. But I have to tell you, it's kind of uncomfortable because I'm not trained as a philosopher, and then there are people who do that a lot better than me. And as you know, we have a lot of arrogant motherfuckers out here who think that they are something that they're not, and that's not me. And so, but thank you for the love for that. So as we have this conversation, I just want to thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. You all live in beautiful California, and the weather's lovely, and I recognize that you could be somewhere else getting high, but you're here. So thank you. I really appreciate it. As we have this conversation, Monica, I just want to make sure the audience understand that there are some assumptions that I make about you before we get started. Because today in our society, with this madman in the White House, we don't oftentimes lay out the assumptions when you are before an audience. And I just want to lay out a few assumptions that I make when I'm before an audience. Number one, I assume that you all respect human rights, that you respect other people's bodily autonomy, you respect their right to liberty. Whether the Constitution says they have constitutional rights in this country, they have human rights, just like everybody in this room has human rights. I assume you all believe that too, because if you don't, this probably ain't the place for you. Another assumption is that I assume that you all are trying to grow up. Growing up is a difficult thing. My last book is called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, and growing up is difficult. In short, it means taking responsibility for your own shit. You know, we all screw up, and we say, my bad, I'm sorry, I screwed up, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, but we all do it, and it's okay, it's part of learning. And then finally, the conversation that we have, the currency is evidence, not people's tears, not people's emotions, not people's amount of money, fame, it's evidence. Those are three assumptions that I start with, and I hope you do too, because if you don't, this ain't a conversation for you.
Thank you. And so we're here in Oakland, which you shared with me that you used to live out here. Something that, and I also need to name something too in this space. I am a Black woman, and when I am talking to my Black peers, I may use language that is relatable to us. So I'm gonna be up here geeking is what I'm saying. I have some questions, and someone no better to answer is you. Again, with this concept of language, something that you've really supported me on my journey and my understanding is, particularly in Black and brown communities, how we use language, how our communities are perceived who use drugs or who work with drugs or who do drugs. How are some of these perceptions on drugs impacting our communities directly?
Yeah, so one of the things that, it's a very complicated thing. So in the United States, we behave like race is a biological reality, when in fact, it's not a biological reality. It's some shit that's been created for some facilitation of social goals. But in terms of biology, I will talk about race here today, but please understand that I know that race is not a biological reality. Now, it's a social construct, and it means a lot in the context of the United States. But that's because we're fucked up. That's not biology. Now, in terms of so-called Black people in the United States and what how we view drugs in communities that we call Black communities. Now, one of the things that has happened, mainstream has done an outstanding job in deflecting responsibility for taking care of communities that pay taxes, certain communities. And so I'll just kind of give you my sort of entrance into the drug field. In the 1980s, mid-1980s especially, we thought that crack cocaine was destroying the Black community. Let's say 1986, we'll just start there. Len Bias died. Some of you all know Len Bias. He was the second overall draft pick of the Boston Celtics. He died. He went out and celebrated after the NBA draft. He died. They said that it was because of crack cocaine. Not true. He had snorted cocaine. He had done a number of other things, but the idea or the story was that he died from crack cocaine. A week later, Don Rogers, the cornerback, a rookie cornerback for the Cleveland Browns, he was the rookie of the year on defense, he died. He actually died out in California, and they said that it was because of crack. Of course it wasn't. He never smoked cocaine. He had done cocaine. Why he died is still not clear. But it doesn't matter. The story was that they died because of crack. Send in Jesse Jackson, send in all the, the people who are the saviors, if you will. I'm being facetious. So you send in people, and the story became that crack was destroying the community. Unemployment rates were a problem, of course, in black communities. They always have been, twice that of so-called white communities. They are that way today. Reaganomics had taken hold. Reaganomics was cutting social programs. And so you had the same problems that you would have in a society. Crack was blamed for those problems. It was misattributed as causing those problems. And it's always easier to blame a drug when you don't have any other solution, or you don't want to take care of any other solution. Because Reagan was busy deregulating businesses and so forth. It's kind of like the shit that Trump is doing. So it all comes back around. Now, we blame crack in the black community as well as the larger community. So it was Democrats, Republicans, everybody blaming crack, which is remarkable because such a small percentage of people actually did crack. But all you have to do is show it on TV over and over, then it looks like everybody's doing crack. And so we believe that sort of thing, that everyone was doing crack. The story became, crack is the evil one. Hip hoppers, they all started pushing this narrative. I was 20 in 1986. I believed this shit. In fact, that's how I got in this field. I was gonna discover some treatment for crack cocaine and save my community. The hip hoppers were saying this, the movies, the comedians, everybody had material. You didn't even have to develop your material. All you had to do was say that crack was doing this. And by the way, we're still here in that kind of narrative. You still hear people besmirching folks who do crack. And there's only 3 people who do crack. I mean, there's a small number of people who do crack. But yet, crack destroyed the community. Remarkable. I mean, like today, I'll give you one example. Black men make up 6% of the general population in the United States. We make up 40% of the prison population. And we're talking about something like crack or drugs. Remarkable. That's a hell of a marketing campaign to get people to believe that drugs are destroying their community when you don't make sure they have jobs, education, opportunity, and then you have a president today arresting. This guy is erasing the history. I mean, erasing black history. Things like Jackie Robinson, people that we think of as good. And so all of these kind of things were done, but not to the same extent that is happening today. And we blame drugs for those problems and not Ronald Reagan's problems or Ronald Reagan's policy.
I 100% agree with that. And I think something that's been on my mind recently, especially in the Black conscious communities that I am in, I'll approach, we talk about how words are power. First, let me start with that. A lot of us talk about how words are power. I approach a friend on the street and I tell him good morning and he takes offense to that. No, sister, we don't say good morning anymore. We say grand rising. I'm like, okay. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know. But the same people who talk about these words being powerful and talk about how we cast spells are the same people, when I ask them their entry point into this type of space, they'll say, growing up, my uncle was in and out of jail because he was addicted to crack. My father wasn't present because he was hooked on drugs. They're using white dominant narrative to cast these spells or these ideas, these perceptions in our communities rather than addressing the real issue, which is systemic oppression and how our communities are policed.
Yeah, but let's be clear. It's not only white dominant narrative, it's also the narrative in the hood, in the community. So we participate in our own subjugation too. So I mean, I just want that to be clear. Listen to any comedian, they are besmirching somebody who does crack. You know, there was a time when we could besmirch people for sleeping with people of the same sex. That's not so cool. You can't do that so conspicuously today. But you still can besmirch somebody for being a crack user. You can say a crackhead, and there are no consequences to that. Whereas if you say, call somebody a name that's related to being gay, that's besmirching. That's not a good thing. So. We all participated in our language when we start judging people about for what they put in their bodies. Now, I think we should take a step back. You know, the Declaration of Independence, our human rights, all of these things says that we have this thing called bodily autonomy. That means you can control what happens to your body. I don't have the right to do that. We say we guarantee that in our declaration, in our Constitution, there's wordings that says that. And so why are we upset with someone whether they use something like crack versus psilocybin versus MDMA versus LSD versus heroin? And we have these kind of distinctions, and we don't even think that it's inconsistent that we are judging people harshly for putting one drug in their system versus another. But as a society, it's our responsibility to call people out when they are besmirching someone for exercising their bodily autonomy. This is one of the reasons that we have this thing we call a debate about abortion. I mean, that shouldn't even be a discussion or a debate. I mean, the person who's pregnant is taking on all the risk, but we as a society, we have a say in that. That's the craziest shit. And they sold it to the public, like the public has a say in that. Just like we sold it to the public, that the public has a say in whether I use heroin or not. That's the craziest shit. The public doesn't have a say about what I do as long as I'm not harming other people. And that's what the founders said when they founded the country. But they managed to sell it to the public and to tell the public that they have a say. And that's where it starts. If you're not like really thinking about that, then you've already have relinquished your rights and you're trying to relinquish mine. And I won't have it.
I agree with you. And I want to circle back to like what you said about how we all participate in how we're framing these narratives, because I don't disagree with you. I 100% agree. You know, there's comedians who, you know, will, Dave Chappelle, perfect example. You know, the Chappelle Show and, you know, the what was it, Uncle Larry or what was it? Tyrone Biggs. Tyrone Biggs is a great example. For me, especially as someone who is reclaiming my indigeneity, when I'm thinking about how I still take that back to the dominant narrative, and maybe it's not just the white dominant narrative, but maybe I should say like colonial narrative, because if we take it back on an indigenous perspective, many black and brown folks, many indigenous folks have been working with mind-altering substances to go into journeys and heal with one another, and it wasn't shamed upon in our circles, but when we enter into the system, we have a different perception on it.
Yeah, I just want to be clear, you know, when we talk about like people doing these things to go into a journey or something, I don't like that kind of language just simply because then it again restricts how people use it. I mean, and people can use these things however they see fit. It's not up to me or some shaman or somebody else to tell them how they can use it, as long as they have the information. I think Thomas Jefferson had a great quote about these kind of things, about if you allow people to tell you what foods to put in your body, what medicines to take, then your mind is in tyranny, as is in a sad shape as your body. And here I am on fucking stage, big up in Thomas Jefferson. It's the ideas. It is the ideas, and so if people say something that resonates and on point, mad props to them. I don't care who it is. And so I don't mean to be up here being like, yo, Thomas Jefferson. I don't mean that. That ain't how this is working. But what I am saying is that the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence was trying to tell the country that you should take control of your body, but that also means that you have to learn about what you're doing, what you're putting in your body. You have a responsibility too. That's the point. And so when we put these things in the hands of medicine, or the hands of shaman, or in the hands of people, and not ourselves, again, we're relinquishing control ultimately. And I don't want to encourage people to do that. I want to encourage people to seek the knowledge. I want people to, because if we encourage our society to seek the knowledge, we might not have that administration that we have in the White House now trying to erase the American sort of democracy.
I totally agree with that, and it reminds me of conversations I've had with many people where I will ask them what was their entry point into this work, into this space. And many times they'll say, well, when I was a teenager or when I was in college, I did a lot of drugs, but that doesn't count. It wasn't until I sat in ceremony. And I say, why doesn't that not count? It was a mind-altering experience, and nonetheless, and I think we have ideas of what qualifies as an experience in itself. I will just leave it an experience, not journey, but an experience, and validating or invalidating someone's way that they want to have an experience. No, I think it was just more of a thought that I have, that I agree that many times that we're shifting our ideas on what a journey is. We're invalidating ourselves, and by invalidating ourselves, we then invalidate people. Of this person is having a mind-altering experience, maybe with a ceremony, versus the person who's having a mind-altering experience on a street. And so then we have a perception of that experience was not a valid experience, or that was they're on drugs. I'm working with medicine.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Those kind of distinctions are artificial. Because the drug gains access to a receptor in the brain. It doesn't care if you're out in the woods in some traditional claiming space, or you're in the middle of, Lake Merritt having this experience. And so the brain doesn't care. The drug binds to the receptor and it does its thing. So all the rest of this stuff, we do this, just like we created this thing called race. And so, yeah, absolutely. Drug effects are drug effects.
We were talking yesterday, and you mentioned, you asked me, you're like, why do people have such an emphasis on the word psychedelic and not psychoactive drug?
Yeah.
Why is it important for you to name the word drug specifically?
Dealt with this issue. So one of the things that I had noticed, I've been in this space for more than 30 years, and one of the things that I noticed in the past 10 years is people started using the term psychedelic. In 2006, Roland Griffiths, who was a friend, published a paper on psilocybin, and there was this coordinated effort among Roland and friends to make sure that the paper was well received, and psychedelics, in this case, psilocybin, would be seen as a good thing. I mean, I can give you all the details of that. I was there. I was a part of the grant review that funded the study. I know the intimate details of this, but I'll spare those for you. But so then we had this kind of rebirth, or this rehabilitation of psychedelics reputation, because in the 1960s, psychedelics got a bad name. They were called hallucinogens, so we changed the name. You do all these things to rehabilitate the reputation. And then which is okay, that's fine, change the name, that's fine. But one of the things that I noticed is that the middle class, particularly white psychedelic users, were using the name to kind of put a circle around the drugs that they like and keep the other motherfuckers out. So if you were using something like methamphetamine, that's not a psychedelic. We don't like those people. Crack cocaine, that's not a psychedelic. We don't like those people. PCP, which had always been included in the hallucinant, that's got to go. Even though we bring in ketamine, ketamine was made by altering PCP's structure, and they produce many of the same effects. So you had this kind of picking and choosing, putting the drugs in the circle that you like, and kicking the ones out that you don't like. But what you're really doing is kicking the people out of the circle. And so when I hear the term psychedelic, you know, it's an arbitrary term. And the person who's using it is the one who determined what drugs are in it. And in our society, what that means is that these drugs are good and these drugs are bad. And again, this kind of exclusion is the very thing that I've been fighting all my career against. And so when I hear people talking about psychedelics as opposed to psychoactive, I know where they're at. It's about psychoactive drugs. That's what these drugs are, and we take them because they are psychoactive. They impact our mood, our behavior. And that's the most precise categorization of these drugs. And that's why I object to the term psychedelic, because I know it's about the people who go to Burning Man versus the people who are from the hood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real. It never falls short on me when I'm going to an experience. And how many folks are familiar with Bufo or 5-MeO DMT? Keep your hand up if you've worked with it personally. Keep your hand up if you worked with it in like a ceremonial experience. Okay, so it's always interesting for me, and I agree with you, because when I'm sitting with 5-MeO DMT, it never, at least when I'm working with it, the ceremonies or experiences that I've had, we're using crack pipes. And we're using crack pipes, and in that space, it's ceremonial, it's healing, but when someone is actually working with crack, then it's bad. And again, it's based back on who deems this as acceptable and who deems these as not acceptable. And I think most times in this part of the conversation, folks will say things like, well, what about fentanyl? You know, there's a fentanyl crisis and people are dying. And something that you talk about in drug use for grown-ups is people taking responsibility for their own shit and stop placing it on the drug.
Yep, that's right. Question?
Can you speak to that? Like, what do you mean? How are taking responsibility for our own shit? Why are we placing so much of an emphasis on the drug itself rather than taking responsibility on how to responsibly use the drug?
When we think about drugs and they're being scapegoated, drugs are easy to scapegoat. And so one way to facilitate the scapegoating of drugs is that you have to take a drug that very few people use. And then you can say incredible things about that drug, incredible being unbelievable, not true. So you can take something like today, heroin, fentanyl. Our society, there's always been very few users of heroin or fentanyl. And you can say incredible things about those drugs and be believed. Like, for example, most people probably in this audience believe that having a heroin overdose or the potential for a heroin overdose is easy. It's not. You know, in the book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups, I really pushed it to try to see what this was like. As part of my own experiment, knowing what I know about drugs, it's really difficult. Not to say that people can overdose off heroin, because people do, but in otherwise healthy people, it's difficult. That's not a message that you know or will hear, but that's a biological fact. And I can get into that. I've written about it, and you can read about it and the details. Now, these drugs that very few people use, one that you will be familiar with, and these exaggerated claims about them. You all heard of a drug called cannabis. In the 1930s, we introduced the term marijuana for cannabis, and we told the population that when people use cannabis, particularly young men, they would soon be killing their parents with axes. This is all written in the press. This came out of the Bureau of Narcotics. Harry Anslinger was publishing these editorials on a regular basis. By the way, he would only put his name on a few of them. They were published in some cases, the Journal of American Medical Association, and these wild claims were being made about marijuana. And many of the people didn't really have experience with marijuana. They knew something about cannabis, but not marijuana. And they were believed. 1937, we banned cannabis, marijuana because of this. People believed those wild claims about marijuana. Reefer madness, you take the cannabis, it makes you go crazy. People believed that for a very long time because fewer people had experience with cannabis at the time. Fast forward today. The majority of our states, or the majority of people in the United States, live in a place where cannabis is now legal. We didn't have any new science or anything of that nature because in 1944, the mayor of New York City publishes a comprehensive report called the LaGuardia Report explaining how the claims about cannabis were exaggerated and not supported by evidence. We knew this since 1944, but very few people had experience with cannabis, and at the time, we also used cannabis to vilify Mexican Americans, Black Americans, and so when you have a drug that very few people use and you can associate it with a despised group, it facilitates the besmirching, the vilification of that drug, and then by extension, those people. It's a strategy that we use today whenever we're talking about fentanyl, which, by the way, is an FDA-approved medication since the 1960s. It's an important medication. It's a medication that's used safely. My nephew, when he had cancer, he was on fentanyl. It's an important medication. But few people know this. And so we can say these horrible things about fentanyl. We can say these horrible things about heroin. We can say these horrible things about methamphetamine because we have paired the drug use with groups we don't like. And that is the purpose. And that facilitates the scapegoating, the vilification of drugs. This is as old as drug policy.
Mm-hmm. And many people might say, well, there's so many drug decriminalization laws happening now where we're trying to protect communities who have been policed by these drugs. We had a talk a few years ago called Decriminalization is Bullshit. And I think that's how we originally connected, because I was a former director of an organization in Colorado working to do decrim work. And you know, it just really started to bother me, going back to what you say, what drugs are acceptable and what aren't, when they're talking about, you know, Black and brown communities deserve access to these healing medicines, and we need to support them in their healing journeys, and they're talking about indigenous lineages. And I'm asking them, I was like, if you're talking about indigenous folks, if you're talking about Black and brown folks, many of us aren't being policed for ayahuasca. Many of us are being policed for meth. Many of us are being policed for these other drugs, but you're leaving them out. So who are you really protecting in this? And so what are your thoughts on drug decriminalization today?
I don't have many thoughts on drug decriminalization. Frankly, I'm not. That's not where I waste my time. I try and make sure people understand that we should be pushing for legal drug regulation, just like we did with cannabis. I mean, it would be consistent with the principles that we espouse. This ain't complicated. The fact that we have banned drugs that people seek and not regulate them, not make sure we put them in unit doses that will facilitate their safety, is remarkable to me. It's remarkable that we do stupid shit like we claim to care about the environment, but yet we eradicate a plant. And there's no kind of discussion from environmentalists. How can you eradicate the opium poppy from the planet, or the coca leaf from the planet, or cannabis? I mean, this is the kind of arrogant shit that the United States does. And so that's remarkable to me, that we don't have pushback in a society. We've all kind of accepted that, oh, that's normal. Normal to get rid of a plant that's been here before us. Wow.
Yeah, I agree to that, and I think that many of us have, as you've mentioned throughout this discussion, our perceptions around drugs and our perceptions that drugs are harmful. There's also a group of people who start to say that we do want folks to, you know, be able to work with these drugs, and we want them to work with them safely, and they use this term harm reduction. But again, going back to language, something that you've said is that even in how we're speaking about these things, you know, harm reduction. You know, we were on a panel earlier, and there was, you know, different conversations with folks, and, you know, what does it mean to be clean? And so I asked them, I said, if, you know, as we talk about, you know, you've been so many years clean, take yourself back to that time when you weren't. How did you perceive yourself in that moment? Are you do you perceive yourself as dirty? Do you perceive yourself as harmful? Can you speak a little to that, just the language that we're using?
I'll start with harm reduction, if that's okay. I wrote about harm reduction and getting rid of the term, not the practice. I'll explain. Harm reduction is just simply common sense. Knowing the dose, making sure you have clean works, you know, just common sense. Many of you all, I hope, brush your teeth this morning. You put on a seatbelt when you get in a car. Harm reduction, but you don't call it harm reduction. You call it common sense, you call it education, you call it some other type of intervention. You call it harm reduction only when you pair it with drugs. Harm reduction is uniquely used in the drug space. My objection to that is that you have this constant pairing of harm, drug, and it shapes how we think about drugs. It shapes our behaviors, when in fact all we're saying is exercise common sense. Another point there is that when I use drugs, you know, let's be real, I don't use drugs to decrease the harm. I'm trying to enhance the beneficial effects and trying to have a good time. And harm, that's not what I'm thinking. It's like I'm getting ready to have sex, and it's like, well, I'm gotta make sure I decrease these harms. Nah, I'm trying to like do my thing, and so why should we do that with drugs? And that's my objection to the term harm reduction, because I don't want it shaping people's views of drug as just being associated with harm, because it leads to other things. It leads to this sort of negative perspective, and it deludes politicians and people who don't know about drugs. It's like, shit, maybe if you all did, well, I'm happy to be here with you all because of psychoactive substances. I mean, this is my favorite topic, and I feel great when I take psychoactive substances. And that's what I want people to understand. That's why people take drugs, not to reduce harm.
And I really appreciate you bringing the joy back into drugs too, because I go to different.
Let's think about that statement. But that's an important statement. Thank you. This is remarkable. We have to tell people that drugs produce joy and euphoria. That's some shit for your ass. If you have to tell people that, and then another thing we do. We have to tell people that joy is good. Wow. I mean, if you are living in a society where that's the case, you're living in a sick-ass society.
Thank you for that. What I wanted to ask for that is, when I go into these different discussions, I feel like I went to Psychedelic Sciences 2 years ago, and everyone was wearing, they're very professional attire, and all of these conversations were centered around how drugs will enhance something, or brain optimization, or how you can work with drugs to get off of other medicines like pharmaceuticals to do this. And for me, I'm like, can we just bring the fun back into it? And why are we taking the joy out of something that originally was used just for us to experience something different?
Yeah, I tell you what, you come to my crib, the joy is in drugs, I assure you that.
What are some other ways that we can shift our perception around drugs? We've talked about language. We've talked about our perceptions in communities. How can we shift our own relationship to drugs away from, like, for me, for example, I wanted to have different experiences with different drugs. And even as I have these conversations, there's still a fear of me, inside of me, that something bad will happen to me.
Yeah, so now we have to get into science. This is what I do. Ultimately, I'm a scientist first, and I publish hundreds of papers, books in this area, and I don't really get to talk about that as much, in part because, you really have to read the science, and you really have to be science literate. And so I write the popular books so people can understand how to interpret the science. And it's not that difficult. I'll tell you why. It is always easier to publish dubious science as long as you are going with conventional wisdom. I'll break that down for you. Some of you all may have been following the science of Alzheimer's research, where they approved medications that didn't work, and we now know that there was a lot of dubious science. People were using the same data over and over. Some of you all may know that, and so that's a big issue in the country right now. They were able to publish that dubious science because it just went with the conventional wisdom. It's a lot worse in drug science, especially drug brain science. And so many of you all believe these inaccurate things about what drugs do to your brains and don't do to your brain. And so that's why I wrote books. I'm writing books so you can see it. And this is like, I call people out. I call the science out. I show you how to evaluate the science, the brain imaging science, especially a lot of that shit with psychedelics that are actually positive, that you all like. A lot of it is crap. And if you read some of my stuff, you'll see why. But let me just take a step back. So one of the things that we tell people is that, this is a popular one, I don't know, drugs will cause neurotoxicity, destroy brain cells, or damage brain cells. Now, the drug that is more likely to produce neurotoxicity of all the drugs that people use recreationally would be the amphetamines. The amphetamines are really good. The amphetamines are drugs like D-amphetamine, which is the active component in Adderall, methamphetamine, MDMA is an amphetamine, methylene dioxymethamphetamine, that's an amphetamine. Amphetamines are really good at producing neurotoxicity at extremely large doses in naive animals. That is, in laboratory rats, you give them doses that are 10, 20, 40 times what you would give a human, and you do it on multiple occasions per day for several days. You can see some neurotoxicity. Now, if you allow the animal to become tolerant, that is, slowly escalate the amount you give over time, you don't see this kind of neurotoxicity. The point is that, yeah, you can demonstrate neurotoxicity in an animal given, in a naive animal given large doses, doses that humans don't take, or else they won't be around to tell you about it. Now, that's a fact, but we haven't seen this kind of thing in humans, even though sometimes, and when people publish papers on brain imaging, the way they use their language, they imply that they did. They don't say they did, but they strongly imply it. And for the sort of less than sophisticated reader, they may take away that, yeah, that's what happens. But it's not the case. We have not seen this neurotoxicity in humans. And trust me, I have spent most of my career looking for it. I have published scientific papers in the scientific literature. I would not be so open about my own drug use, and also such a believer in drug use if I was worried about neurotoxicity. That's not to say that you can be stupid and take drugs, because you should not be stupid and take drugs. But the point is, there is this belief of this neurotoxicity caused by drugs. You would start looking for it first with the amphetamines. And if you don't see it with the amphetamines, the likelihood of you seeing it with these other drugs is a lot lower. Does that make sense? Okay. But please, read some shit that I've written on this so you'll have it, and then you'll see how I go through the literature, and the literature that I cite, and how I take apart the literature that is overstating their findings or being inappropriate in their interpretations. It's important that we read. It's really important. I know we live in this era of fucking social influences, and they tell you that you don't have to read, and that's really the downfall of our country, because you must read. If you don't read, it's over.
Can you share a little bit about experience that you had when you went to the Philippines? I think one of the times that I first you really came on my radar was when it was publicized how you were being villainized in the Philippines when you were giving a talk at a university, similar to what you're sharing with us now.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I was in the Philippines. I was invited by a human rights group. At the time, their president, Duterte, was saying that a person who uses methamphetamine for a year, it shrinks their brain, and as a result, that person is irretrievable, meaning we could now kill them. And he engaged this campaign where he killed thousands of people who were suspected of selling and using methamphetamine. And while I was there, I gave a talk, and he was supposed to send his medical person to speak after me, and so we could have this discussion. Of course, they didn't show up because the evidence was clear, and I don't blame them for not showing up, because they would have been embarrassed. But in any rate, after I spoke, he had a press conference, and he called me out by name, and he said all these horrible things about me. And I was told basically that, you might want to think about getting out, because they were hiring people to take people out for as little as $100. And so, I didn't know the Philippines that well, so I broke out like at midnight or what have you. And then last year, I got a call from the International Criminal Court, wanted to talk to me about this experience. Long story short, Duterte is in The Hague right now. They arrested him for his campaign against people who use drugs.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. I think on that greater scale too, him being incarcerated for his use of drugs also just reminds me of how often our government actually benefits off of, the drug industry.
I'm sorry, I didn't say this. Our government, by the way, supported his campaign, funded his campaign through foreign aid and the war on drugs. So we're complicit. Your tax dollars helped do that.
Mm-hmm. And so they have this war on drugs, but they also benefit on the war on drugs in itself as well. And even when it comes to the money, could you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, a number of people say things like the war on drugs didn't work. I'll leave aside for a second the war analogy. In war, people died. So it's such a stupid analogy to have in terms of public health space. But just to be clear, when people say the war on drugs didn't work, if something didn't work, it would not be continued for more than 50 years. It is working handsomely. One of the things that has happened with the war on drugs, they have expanded the foot soldiers in the war on drugs to now include people like your pharmacists, your physicians, social workers have always been down with this, academics, all the people who you don't think are in the war on drugs or involved in the war on drugs, they are all participating because of the loot. People are, this is how people are funded. Your medical examiners, when you all are told that you have this overdose crises, these numbers are inflated in order, not that people are not dying, because people are dying, but the reasons for people dying have been exaggerated. Just one example you all know, George Floyd. We all saw that George Floyd was choked by Derek Chauvin to death. The initial report came out that he had died from a fentanyl and methamphetamine overdose. Then we all saw the video, and then the full autopsy had to correct that. But now, the death certificate, the thing that goes to the CDC to make up the national overdose tally, George Floyd's death is still considered, is counted in the fentanyl death as well as the methamphetamine death. This is happening all over the country. And so we know George Floyd died because he was choked to death. It's true, he had fentanyl in his system, he had methamphetamine in his system, he had cannabis in his system, he had cotinine, which is the nicotine metabolite, in his system. But none of those things killed him. This cat's knee on his throat killed him. But this is happening all around the country because people are being incentivized to say these are drug overdoses. And so that's how you are having these 100,000 deaths from drugs. And so when people talk about overdose, you need to really know what they mean. Notice on the CDC data, what they say is that drug involved. They don't say drug induced, it says drug involved. Just simply mean that a drug might have been in the system. I say might because biological confirmation ain't even necessary to include it there. So do you all see this? This is how we are all being manipulated.
What I appreciate about you is every single time I've heard you speak, and you speak a lot, you have this passion as if you haven't spoken before. And didn't you just come back from Brazil or Colombia?
Yeah, I was in Brazil, that's right.
This passion that you have, why are you so passionate? Like, what do you want folks to take away from these conversations?
Drugs make me passionate, the psychoactive effects of drugs, and also the fact that, I started out studying drug addiction, along the way, I discovered drugs. I was afraid of drugs when I started studying drugs, and I discovered drugs, and discovering drugs taught me how to think, and that's the most powerful thing anybody can have in a society. That ability to evaluate information, think, because if you got a brain, you can walk into any situation with confidence. And that's the thing that administrations, whether it's the current administration or other administration, don't want the society to be able to think. Because if you can think, you wouldn't go for half of the bullshit that you go for.
As I mentioned, you all are my peers. I feel like I would do injustice if I didn't invite you to ask a question or two. So if there's anyone that has a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He got him. I'm sorry, brother. There's a question out of curiosity. Is it true that alcohol, drunk driving, manslaughter is more than all the other drugs put together? Have you heard of that?
I'm sorry. Is it true?
Alcohol, drunk driving.
Yes.
All the other drugs put together, alcohol kills more.
The question is, does alcohol kill more drugs than all the other drugs put together? Drunk driving. No, I'm not aware of that. The latest numbers of alcohol that I'm aware of is just under 100,000 people. And the drug that they used to say killed more people was tobacco-related death, and that used to always be more than 400,000. But, the tobacco industry always objected to how they counted those deaths. But that's the drug that people used to always worry about.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So my question is around how to understand threshold, because we were just on a panel talking about addiction and how addiction plays out in communities, and there are a lot of folks that I'm connected to that experience harm. They harm themselves. And I'm also somebody that has a lot of affinity for all of these various substances that can really bring a lot to our lives. And I really like, Monica, how you said that it's not just about what can this substance do to enhance our function in life and make us better, better producers in society. So trying to understand from you from that scientific perspective, because that's not where my expertise lies. Like, how do we understand threshold, and how do we like deal with and understand harm, and how do these two things kind of like come together? Like, how can we really try to tackle our interactions with these substances in a more responsible way?
So I want to make sure I clearly understand what you're saying. Thresholds for what? What do you mean?
Because of prohibition, we don't have a clear understanding of, well, if you take this much methamphetamines over this amount of time, that's when the toxicity is really going to start to affect us. Or like when we see our relatives out in the streets that are really having a hard time, you know, it's like, what is it? What is it for you from that scientific perspective that's like tips over the threshold and makes something that can be really expansive turn into something really toxic?
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer from a humanistic perspective and a scientific perspective. So from a scientific perspective, so I've written a lot of things on how people can do these things safely, right? Things like understand some things about routes of administration, you know, how you're using the drug. Understand something about dose. But most importantly, understand that hopefully you have what you think you have, right? That's the most important thing. So that's scientific kind of thing. And now from the humanistic perspective, you know, one of the things we do, we get it twisted. We think that because somebody meet criteria for drug addiction, it has something to do with the drug. Oftentimes it doesn't. There are 11 symptoms that people can endorse in order to meet criteria for a substance use condition. And you know, you have to endorse a certain number of symptoms, and that person must be impaired or distressed by those symptoms. Those are the two kind of components. Oftentimes, people who do diagnosis, they forget that second part, right? Now, when you actually give the person a comprehensive assessment, you start to find out like what's really going on, what's driving this behavior that has become pathological. So if you focus on those symptoms and not the drugs, I think people will, their sort of assessment and their desire to help will go a lot further if they focus on the symptoms and take this out of the drug realm. And then we also have to acknowledge that there are some people who are just, they just haven't grown up. Growing up is difficult, and they just haven't learn how to inhibit in a number of areas in their life, not only with their drug taking, but with their rearing of their children, with other issues in their lives. And so we have to make sure that we don't slip into that easy sort of frame of only looking at the drug and not the totality of the person.
Appreciate it. One, maybe two more questions.
So in the past, you have talked about safe centers and how it's not necessarily feasible in the U.S., comparing it to Switzerland, where it's ethnically homogenous. And I'm wondering what your stance is now, given the fact that they're trying to roll some out, like there's some in Denver. What is your stance on what they're doing right and what we could improve upon, given that we're not an ethnically homogenous nation?
So you mean the safe injection facilities or what? Yeah, so one of the things that we do in the United States, again, we act like safe injection facilities are for drug users, right? And they're really for people who don't have housing, services, all of these things, but we act as if this is about drugs, right? Most people who use drugs will never go to one of those facilities. Those facilities are frequent by people who are desperate. And if we dealt with their other needs, and then you wouldn't have, this wouldn't even be a drug issue, which it's not. And so my sort of concern is that we always pretend that this is a drug issue, when in fact this is a housing issue. This is a mental health issue. This is a medical issue. That worries me, but because I understand the only way you can get people help is to say that it's a drug issue. It's like the person who has a hammer, now everything is a nail. But the thing that we have to do is be careful and not believe our hype to get funding or just the little bit of help that we can get for these people. Right? I mean, because like at Burning Man, there's a lot of drug use that go on. Nobody ever talk about Burning Man as a drug problem. I mean, I had never seen so much drug use because it's drug use by the wealthy, you know, and it's because it's Elon Musk and those people. I mean, they turned me off of drugs. They managed to do that. Not entirely. They just turned me off of them. But
First, I want to give thanks for your work. And my question is, do you feel it's important for people to be aware of their dependency on drugs to regulate their own emotional control?
Of course, adults. We're talking about adults, right? Yeah. Right. I think it's important for adults to always be aware of their footprint, the space that they're taking up in the world, how their behavior is impacting other people. That's what being an adult is. Like, you know, like me being on the stage with Monica. I love Monica, and I'm always worried that I got to make sure I show her the respect she deserves, show you the respect you deserve. I'm always conscious of that. And I think adults should always be conscious of that. If I'm doing something that's messing somebody else up or harming somebody, hurting somebody's feeling, I have to be conscious of that. The same is true if I'm taking drugs or doing something. It's the same thing. I have to be an adult. I have to take responsibility for that. I'm constantly worried about that.
I think we're, I wish, but don't be alarmed because this is just part one of 2 conversations with Dr. Hart, so hopefully there'll be some more chance for dialogue. I just want to say I appreciate you so much. I'm constantly learning from you. As someone who's not a scientist, I'm learning how to hold these conversations with compassion and center the people that we're really talking about this work. Okay, we have room for one more question, I just heard.
Yay, I wrote it with AI.
Oh, okay, ChatGPT.
I'm a quick draw AI.
I don't think you want to tell people you wrote some shit with AI.
It's actually very knowledgeable about mysticism and psychedelics, and it knows about you. Peace, Dr. Hart. I'm Sarah Serotonin, High Priestess of Per Ankh Entheogenic Church in Detroit. We're a Black-led psychedelic sanctuary blending sacred plant medicine, harm reduction, and ancestral science. We just launched a Kalindi IE Potency Lab, a community lab for mushroom testing, education, and healing. You've been a guiding light for so many of us doing this work, so I'd love to ask, how do you see community-led science and spirituality shaping the future of drug policy and healing spaces?
Community-led science. Can you break that down from just what you mean by it, please?
So community-led, so if we have a local farmer who is curious about his potency, about what he's actually serving, we will test that for him.
Yeah, so I think that's brilliant. I mean, I think that's what the United States was founded on. I mean, without my ancestors being enslaved, of course. But I mean, that's a good part of like people taking charge of their own products. They're growing their own things. Let me know when you all learn how to grow some poppies. I'll be there. I think that's brilliant.
Well, Dr. Hart, thank you again so much. I just want to close this conversation, and then any final words that you have is, a few years ago, I really appreciate the question you asked me backstage of how I got into journalism. I'll save you all the long story I gave him, but a few years ago, we had the Oakland ghost ship fire. I don't know if anybody remembers that. I was a co-founder of a magazine at the time, and the main narrative that was being pushed out was they were using drugs, they're drug addicts, all of this. And I was actually invited to that party that night, and I know a few people who lost their lives. And it affected me very deeply, as many of you, I'm sure, in this room as well. And I called one of my writers, one of my most amazing writers, and I said, you have to write, help me write something. And this is the title, Oakland Housing Crisis, Not Drugs, Responsible for the Ghost Ship Fire. Within 24 hours, that had over 1 million views, and every major outlet was shifting that conversation. And so I thank you as also being someone in this space who is working to shift these conversations, because there's a root cause to everything, and if we're just placing it on the drug and not the systems that are really harming us, we're failing to really heal the communities in the ways that we talk about. So Dr. Hart, thank you so much. Oh, and if you have
Thank you, Monica. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You and I, we do this regularly, so thank you. And thank you all for being patient and coming out. And please, just try to stand up for other people's rights. I know you'll stand up for your own, but stand up for other people's rights. That's what America is supposed to be about.